Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining. My name is Travis Madsen. I'm the Transportation Program Director at the Southwest Energy Efficiency Project. We're just going to wait a couple of minutes for folks to filter in. So sit tight and we'll get started in a moment. All right. Looks like all the panelists are here. Let's get started. My name is Travis Madsen. I'm the Transportation Program Director at the Southwest Energy Efficiency Project. I'm joined today by Candy Barr-Worley with the Nevada Department of Transportation and Will Dreyer with the Electrification Coalition. And we're here to talk a little bit about some of the new federal tools that are available to fund electric vehicle charging infrastructure with a specific focus on Nevada. So Tyler, if you could go to the next slide. Again, I'm Travis Madsen. I'm the Transportation Program Director at SWEEP. I work in Nevada and 5 other states in the Southwest region at the state level, at the local government level, and with electric utilities to advance electric vehicle deployment, as well as ensure that we've got the infrastructure necessary to make those tools viable in our transportation system. Candy, can you introduce yourself real quick?
Sure. My name is Candy Barr-Worley. I am the Division Chief for Sustainability and Emerging Transportation within Nevada DOT. And I am the person that is working with the NEVI plan the most in the state of Nevada.
Excellent. Will.
Thanks, Travis. And hey, everybody, Will Dreyer. I'm a policy manager with the Electrification Coalition, and I lead our work for the state of Nevada.
Great. Next slide, Tyler. So here's a brief outline of what we're going to talk about. I think the slides and the presentation here are going to take somewhere in the range of a half an hour, and we should have ample time for questions from the audience. We had some submitted in advance, and if there's anything else that the audience would like to ask, you'd see a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Go ahead and type any questions that you have into that box during the presentation, and Candy, Will, and I will answer those at the end of the presentation. I'm going to start things off with just some overview of the context around what's happening in Nevada around transportation electrification. Will is going to talk a little bit about some of the tools that the Electrification Coalition offers, in particular those that are aimed at local governments. Candy's going to talk a little bit about what the state of Nevada is up to, in particular the NEVI program and the new discretionary grant program that was launched earlier this week. And then I'll briefly cover some of the additional tools that the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law gave to local governments for funding charging infrastructure. And then, like I said, we should have ample time to go over any questions that you all in the audience may have. Next slide. So just for a little bit of context, Nevada is well on its way in the journey towards transportation electrification. The state's in the top 10 states in the country in terms of the light duty electric vehicle market, and seeing electric vehicles out on the road is a pretty common sight these days. Lots of new EV registrations and new types of electric vehicles are hitting the roads. The state got its first electric school bus recently. And I'm sure everyone has seen the news about the expansion of the Tesla factory up north and the expansion of manufacturing of larger types of electric vehicles. The next slide just shows a little bit of what the sales statistics have looked like in the light duty vehicle market share. Practically nothing back in 2015 up to almost 10% in 2022. We're anticipating that there'll be somewhere close to 50,000 light duty EVs on Nevada's roads by the end of this year, climbing up into the 65,000 range in 2024, and maybe a little bit more depending on how effective the tax credits in the Inflation Reduction Act are at getting vehicles on the road. I think that if this kind of pace continues, Nevada is on track to having most new vehicles be electric sometime in the mid-2030s. Next slide. There's a lot of reasons why this is good news for Nevada. Some of the benefits that transportation and electrification is unlocking are savings on driving. So just talking about light duty vehicles, not medium or heavy duty. We're estimating that drivers will save in the range of $14 billion on fuel and maintenance and vehicle ownership from now through 2050. One of the major reasons for that's in that figure on the right. If you look at an EV charged at home, the cost equivalent, if you think about it in terms of gasoline, is comparable to about $1 a gallon or a little less. Whereas the price at the pump in Nevada right now is about $4.30. So there's a lot of economic benefits that this transition is going to unlock. EVs also don't have any tailpipe pollution. That means there'll be a lot less climate changing emissions. Through 2050, the value of that's estimated at $3 billion. Additionally, EVs don't produce health-threatening pollution, such as smog. Eliminating that pollution through mid-century is worth about $7 billion in public health benefits. And then additionally, EVs help us use our electric system at a more efficient and effective level by spreading the costs of the power plants and the power lines and the distribution system over a larger amount of electricity sales. And that puts downward pressure on the rates that everyone pays for electricity. We're estimating the benefit of that at in the range of $4 billion for Nevada through 2050. And then additionally, there's just, I think, benefits in terms of the actual vehicles themselves. They're quieter, they offer a smoother ride. And once you get in one, it's hard to go back. Next slide, Tyler. To unlock those benefits, though, there's still a lot of work that we need to do, and that's mainly what we're going to be talking about today, specifically charging infrastructure. A lot of the charging is going to happen in private locations, like in garages or in hubs where fleets are parked. But in order to make this work, we're also going to need a robust public charging network. In cities, along highways, at workplaces, at multi-unit dwellings, in a lot of different locations. The International Council for Clean Transportation published a study a year ago or so, looking at just exactly how many charging stations we might need. They estimated that the Las Vegas area, for example, needs about 15,000 more public charging stations by 2030 to enable anticipated levels of EV growth. About 38% of the investment they're anticipating will go into DC fast charging stations, which are the kind that you find along highways, and Candy's going to be talking more about as part of the NEVI program. About 11% of that investment it will go to multi-unit dwellings, 11% at workplace sites, and then about 9% at public level 2 sites. And then this chart on the right just shows part of the analysis that ICCT did, looking at how many EVs are served by every non-home charger as the electric vehicle fleet grows. The average they're estimating is somewhere in the neighborhood of 11 or 12 EVs per non-home charger. And the more EVs you have in your fleet, the more efficiently those charging ports tend to get utilized. So you can kind of see as the graph goes to the right, you can serve more EVs per charger. And Nevada's up there in the top 10 currently. And as we deploy more EVs, we expect that those chargers will be used more efficiently. So there's a lot of point here is there's just a lot of work to do. But fortunately, there's a lot of new tools to make the needed investments. So I'm going to pass it off to Will to talk a little bit about some of the tools that Electrification Coalition offers, in particular for local governments.
Thanks, Travis. And then you can pop over the next slide, just give you a little overview of our organization. So the Electrification Coalition is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization, and we're dedicated to the rapid electrification of our transportation sector. We do this in order to, one, combat the national and economic security harms that arise from oil's monopoly on the transportation sector and the cartels that control the global oil supply, which is made up of actors that hold neither our interest nor our values, but also, two, in an effort to bolster our global leadership in the automotive manufacturing and supply chain that affects, all of our jobs here at home. So to kick it off, I'd like to introduce our first resource. If you can go to the next slide for me. This is our local government playbook. This is a resource we released in December last year. It contains actions that local governments can enact, best practices, policy approaches, and lessons learned from charging deployments. On the next slide, and at a very high level, this resource is broken down into 4 sections you can see here: policy action, state and regional planning, stakeholder engagement, and site planning. And each of these sections has 3 actions in an order of ways that folks can start engaging. Number 1 being something that they can tackle right now, 2, something in the near future, and 3, something a little bit further down the road. Next slide. But more recently, and what I'm really excited that we've been able to launch back in January 2023, is our new EV funding finder. This is a user-friendly tool that allows users to identify multiple pathways for funding transportation electrification projects. We created this funding finder tool to answer the question, where's the money? How can I get access to it and start working on these projects? We created this resource as a response to the unprecedented investment that the federal government's making in transportation electrification, and knowing that in order to meet the federal, state, local goals, which are incredibly ambitious, that we need to make sure we're using every cent of this funding in an efficient and equitable way. If you want to go on to the next slide. Sorry. So we're looking at the EV funding finder. We believe will make it easy for you all to identify and access new federal funds and the incentives that are also available, and which ones can be stacked for different types of electrification projects, what kind of matching and other details that will be required. We think this will be a very easy way for folks to kind of plug in and figure out where they can start utilizing these funds. So you want to pop to the next slide. You can see down the bottom left, there's a QR code and a website that you can go directly to the tool. But you'll see on the top left here is what you'll see when you open the screen. And on the left side of that is a description on why this is important and the content of a context of why it all matters. On the right side, though, you'll see step 1 as you start working your way through the tool, and you will select which entity you represent before moving on to step 2, which is on the bottom right here. And you from there will select what funding scenarios or what projects you're hoping to take on. So for example, I might in step 1 select that I'm a city, and in step 2 select that I'm looking to purchase or lease light duty electric vehicles and the needed electric vehicle charging infrastructure. Step 3 also is optional as you work your way through, just as a call out. But if you're looking to get updates as new information is added to the tool, we'll ping you and let you know that a new program or something has been added. On to the next slide, please. So after you fill out steps 1, 2, and maybe 3, you'll be taken to this screen. And this contains like all the exciting opportunities that might be available to you as the entity that you've described. So on the right side of the screen, you'll see a population, or it will populate all of the eligible funding streams and activities that you selected in step 2, getting additional information by clicking on those links, keeping you within the website, but also telling you, again, like what's the stackability across multiple programs, what are the fund matching requirements that you'll have to bring to the table, and other important information. On the left side is case studies that we've created. These are fictional case studies we've created to illustrate, I think this one's like the town of like Voltsville or something, and how that city might go about using these programs in these transportation electrification projects. So if you're interested in this, we also have like a dedicated email for this tool specifically for you if you're looking for support, but you can also reach out to me, which I think my email's at the end of this presentation. Finally, on the last slide, I did want to call out just a few of the incentives for the IRA. Tyler, if you can advance, thank you. Oh, might still be, guess they're at the end of the slide still, but I can come back to the IRA stuff and I'll just hand it over to Candy.
Thanks, Will. And now we have Candy Barr-Worley from Nevada DOT to talk a little bit about the work that she's doing for the state to implement some of the new federal funding streams. Thanks, Candy.
No problem. I just wanted to share with everybody, I'm not sure what the level of participation is with this webinar, but the NEVI plan, everybody seems to think that it's just about putting charging stations along the roadways and getting the infrastructure out there for EV vehicles to actually be charging and going along their way. However, it doesn't involve more than just that. It's not just EV charging, it's labor and workforce development. It's implementation strategies, which include all of the reporting that is required after we get the charging stations up and running. It involves cybersecurity so that payments are secure and people using the pumps, their information is not being stolen or shared. And it also involves the equity within our state constituents living here in the living here in Nevada. Sorry. Next slide. We have there's a 5-year plan that was required from the federal government. Year 1 was already due. We have turned that in and we received the acceptance of it. During the first year, we identified the needs that we needed on all of our interstates. With that, we found that we had 5 stations that either needed to be developed or needed to be upgraded so that all of our interstates would be considered fully built out. We also identified some of the exceptions. An exception can be if there is a gap between 2 charging stations that's more than 50 miles, or if there is a charging station that's more than a mile away from the roadway that you have identified. So for instance, on I-15, if we had one on Flamingo Boulevard and it was more than a mile from the highway, we would need to get an exception for that. We identified 3 exceptions, all of them along the I-80, and all 3 of those exceptions were approved from the federal program. So with that said, we are looking to put a new station in at Carson City, which will help with the I-580 and will also help with US 50. We also are putting in a new station, either in Gene or Prem. We're identifying that location now with NV Energy, and that will complete the I-15. And then in Moapa, Carlin, and Wells, we are upgrading their current infrastructure to meet the requirements of the new standards of 600 kilowatts and 4 pumps. For the second year, we've already started working on this program. And for this, we're identifying all of the needs on US highways. So that's US 50, US 395, US 95, and US 93. Some of you may be thinking, well, what about US 6? The 4 that are listed here are already designated through the federal designation as alternative fuel corridors. So these are the roads that we are required to focus on with the beginning stages of the funding that's coming to our state. We also we're at the beginning stages of the outreach program that we'll be putting together so that we can make sure that we're meeting everybody's needs. Along with outreach, we're working with NV Energy one-on-one. They have some great tools that they're using for their customer base that is giving us some data that we need. And we are working with another company by the name of Streetlight that is actually able to identify the movement of vehicles within our state, how many vehicles go on certain roadways, where they tend to stop. That way we're able to put charging stations where the traffic is already at its largest amount. We are identifying the exceptions for our US highways as well. As many of you know, driving through our state, we have several areas along US 93, US 95, and US 50 that we don't even have a population base. And many of those areas fall into that 50-mile realm that we're required to hit. So we're looking at where we can actually strategically place the infrastructure so that it will be used the most, available to the most vehicles, and it might not hit that every 50-mile mark. So we're trying to identify that so that we can let the federal government know where those are. We also are identifying whether we as a state are going to access the funds of NEVI through an RFP, an RFI, or a grant process. We're looking at several different opportunities because of the Title 23 requirements. There are many states that are trying to figure out how each different type of advertisement will work within their states. So we have to meet the federal laws and the state laws, and we're working with some of our executive leadership to figure out what is the best way to get the money out there, and also have the OEMs or the individual owners of the charging stations be responsible for the infrastructure so that it's always up and running and meeting that 97% that's required. We have, with the first year, the upgrades that we have in Moapa, Carlin, and Wells, we are working with the Wells rural utility for Carlin and Wells. And in Moapa, we're working with the Moapa utility to figure out how to increase the current availability of electricity. And they're both on board as far as upgrading what is currently on their property. And then with Carson City and Gene, we're working with NV Energy. Many of you may be aware that they also have received $100 million from our state government from SB 448. So we are working with them to make sure that we are not duplicating efforts and that the money that is coming to Nevada can definitely be used in all areas of our state. Next slide, please. Earlier this week, we were finally given the information for the discretionary grant program, the breakdown of that. To be honest with you, I have started reading it, but I have not finished it yet. It's a couple hundred, or not a couple hundred pages. Sorry, it's about 100 pages. But I can tell you that there's $700 million available. In federal year 2022, there is $300 million available. And in 2023, there is $400 million available. On the right side of this slide, I have given you guys just a small breakdown of the notice of funding and how it works. So you have a community program or a corridor program. I've let you know that the deadline for the application process is May 30th. And that also the application needs to be electronically submitted through grants.gov. And then also I gave you the email address for transportation.gov/grants. There is a ton of helpful resources within that website that you can find if you need help with grants. We also want to make it clear that at this point, Nevada is looking to spend the NEVI funds. We are not looking to apply for discretionary grants. We're hoping that our MPOs, our cities, our counties, and other entities would be reaching out for those funds for projects that they're putting together. And we are more than willing to write letters of support to help them achieve the grant process and to hopefully win those grants and bring that money into Nevada. Next slide. There are also 2 webinars that were announced, one being on March 21st, the other being on March, oh wait, I put 2 dates. I'm gonna have to look up that date really quick. The one webinar is on March 21st, and I believe the second webinar is on March 29th, but I will get you guys the correct date in just one second. And below is the registration link that you can either Google FHWA and go in through the environmental tab, or you can write that down quickly and be able to access it so that you can sign up for the registrations. In these webinars, they most likely are going to break down all of the requirements for the discretionary grants and discuss it in more details than what I have today. Next slide. I also wanted to share with this group that Nevada has been part of a group of people called the Rev West. It's a multi-state coordination that has been happening since 2017. The 8 states that are listed have been working together to make sure that we are looking at all of our corridors that go in and out of each state and making sure that we're providing electric charging so that people can easily drive from state to state and not have an issue once they get into another state. The governors have signed MOUs, which is a memorandum of understanding. So they all agree that this is important. And we've gone through 2 leaderships here at NDOT, and each governor has signed it. We are currently, as a group, rewriting the memorandum of understanding, and it will go to the governors again by the end of this year. We support each other. We have meetings monthly. We support each other with our own efforts and sharing our wins and losses so that nobody's making the same mistakes and we all can be moving forward at a faster pace. And we are very adamant that the charging needs to be increased, and we just want it to be able to work and run efficiently through all of our states. And next slide. I think that's the end for me.
Thanks, Candy.
Yeah.
Sometimes I get questions from local governments about, how they might be able to invest in EV charging projects, even if they're not on an alternative fuel corridor. Or in one of the areas that's targeted by some of these grant programs that we've just been talking about. So I want to take a moment and just review a couple of the additional tools that the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law created that local governments could use to do EV charging infrastructure activities. And then I'll talk a little bit about some of the trade-offs that a local government would have to consider before deciding to use some of these monies for this purpose. So this table here, everywhere there's a star, that is a new authority that the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law created for the use of existing transportation dollars that all local governments get. So the money that comes through the National Highway Performance Program, the Surface Transportation Block Grant, the Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality Program, the State Planning and Research Program, and the Metropolitan Planning Program. So If a local government needed to find some extra money to do an EV infrastructure plan, those are all eligible expenses for the Surface Transportation Block Grant, State Planning and Research, or Metropolitan Planning. And then if a local government wanted to do workforce development, actually install some public charging sites, or electrify some public transit infrastructure, like electrify a bus depot, or if needed, put some public transit charging infrastructure in a different location. Those types of expenditures are all possible to do with the National Highway Performance Program, Surface Transportation Block Grant, or CMAQ. Next slide. There are some trade-offs with these funds. I mean, I guess the good thing is that all governments have these monies now and can use them at any time. But in order to do that, you got to weigh the trade-offs. For example, if any EV projects using these funds would be in competition with all the other eligible uses of the transportation funds, roads and bridges, and all the other things that local governments do with their transportation dollars. Also, those funds typically require a local match of 20% to go along with the federal investment. Using these monies, you have to comply with the same federal rules that you would have to comply with for any other transportation project. So those are Davis-Bacon and Buy America. But in good news, I think that it's possible to stack funding from a bunch of these different sources. So, these monies might be helpful to fill in any gaps that might arise after pursuing any available NEVI funds, or discretionary grants, or other types of money that might be available. So I think it's important that local governments take a look at how they might use that new authority. Just briefly wanted to mention a couple other options for looking at financial assistance. The Nevada State Infrastructure Bank was set up, I think, to help local governments with some of the local match or financing that might be necessary to do a project. So I think that's an option to inquire with about financing support. For really big projects, the Federal Transportation Infrastructure Innovation and Financing Credit Assistance Program can do work on electric transportation. And then for smaller projects, every local government's getting a smaller amount of money from the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grants. You could do a lot of things with that money, but electric transportation is one possible use. And then finally, tribal governments have their own special program, the Federal Lands and Tribal Transportation Program, that can fund electric vehicle projects. So let's go to the next slide, Tyler. Will, do you want to just make a quick note of some of these IRA incentives, and then folks want to ask questions about these, we can go into them in more detail.
Yep. Yeah, I'll keep it short, but I did want to call out the tax credits and federal funding opportunities that are part of the Inflation Reduction Act. I think, particularly for this audience, 30C and 45W are the ones to call out here. 30C is a tax credit for installing charging infrastructure, and this can be up to a 30% tax credit capped at $100,000 per unit, as long as you meet certain requirements there, which include wage and apprenticeship requirements, and the location requirements need to be in a low-income community or non-urban area. They also made bidirectional charging explicitly eligible, which I think is important for as more vehicle-to-grid technologies get to more mature. The other one, 45W, is the commercial fleet vehicle tax credit. This will depend on the weight of the vehicle and the incremental cost between the comparable internal combustion engine vehicle, but something to look into as you're looking to electrify your fleet. Also, a lot of federal funding opportunities. Again, I won't go through all of them, but the ones listed here, there's even there's many more, and all amounts to billions of dollars that are available to go towards transportation electrification projects. So I'll toss it back to you, Travis.
Thank you. Okay, Tyler, next slide. We have some questions in the queue that I'm gonna ask you and Candy and you will, and then anyone in the audience, if you have a question that you would like to ask us about what you've heard today, or really anything regarding electric transportation, just drop those questions into the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So the first question is for you, Candy. It comes from Tom Wicker. Well, and maybe it's more of a comment that you can reply to. But Tom says that there is a lack of charging for EVs other than Tesla away from larger cities and I-80, US 50, and some other Route 395 corridors, which limits the usefulness of non-Tesla EVs in Nevada for other than local trips. Especially for people who like to head to the outdoors for camping, for example, from trips from Reno to Berlin Ichthyosaur Park, or from Reno to Death Valley. Anyway, do you have any comments from your perspective at Nevada DOT about that problem and how the state is looking at it?
I sure do. Great question, Tom, because I can see you've mentioned the gaps that I discussed on one of my slides. Like I said, once again, we have large areas of roadway where we do not even have population. And not only do we not have population, we do not have electricity at certain areas, which I didn't even know that not having electricity existed in this day and age. So that was kind of a fun fact to find out about Nevada when I started this program. Our goal with the NEVI funds is to really focus on the area that NV Energy does not service. So with that said, NV Energy services 75% of our state. So with their SB 448 funding, we're looking at them to provide the charging stations in the rural areas that they provide service. From there, we are going to focus our 38 million that we're getting from the NEVI funds to the areas that that are not represented from NV Energy and will need help to have that charging available. So that is a priority for me, is to hit those little pockets where people are driving to go camping or fishing or hiking, like you said. Regarding Tesla, it was also announced that Tesla will be opening up some of their stations to all EV charging. We're not sure what that looks like yet. I do have a meeting directly with Tesla next week, so I'm hoping to know more then. My goal with that meeting is to explain to Tesla what areas are important for us, that they open those charging stations so that it's more readily available along these routes. Also, regarding the outdoors, part of Rev West, we're looking at our national parks, which NDOT has some, doesn't have as much as Utah, what have you, but we're looking at how to allow EV cars to access those draws to our state. So we're looking to do that. And we also have been speaking with Rivian, who's looking at putting in charging stations at some of our larger hiking and camping areas. Not only do they want to service their own vehicles, but they want to allow EV charging in general to the public that has the more outdoorsy look. So I hope that answered your question.
Excellent. We have another question from Stephanie Erga in Nye County, who is thinking about building some EV charging stations in Pahrump. Candy, do you have any thoughts about that particular geography of the state?
I do.
Okay.
So Stephanie, I'm happy to discuss this with you. Nye County is definitely one of the counties that we will be reaching out to when we start our outreach program. Sorry. We have already looked in your area, and we're currently trying to identify locations that would be the best places for EV charging to go. With Nye County, we are hoping that their MPOs or their city government would want to work with us directly to help get that infrastructure in place. And we have several OEMs that are looking at that area as well. So an OEM is a business that owns charging stations that knows that you guys have a need and they're looking to put charging into that area as well. If you go to nv.dot.gov, you can access our website, and there is an area that you can sign up for more information. And as information becomes available, we make sure that people that are signed up are getting that information. So that might be a good place for you to reach out to us as well. My email will be at the end, just like Will said. You can reach out to me as well.
Candy, there's a follow-up question in the chat here on PowerUmp, in particular about like how does the NEVI funding interact with the Valley Electric Association, which is the service provider for the PowerUmp area? Do you have any comment on that?
Yes, we're working with Valley Electric, and we're trying to identify the best areas for charging stations to go so that we can then talk to them to figure out what is the bandwidth, what is it going to take to get the energy to that specific location where the majority of the cars are going. It's really important that we talk to our individual electric providers to give them information so that they can start doing the homework on their side. Otherwise, what happens is other states have had this issue that they've designated a great spot, but the electricity that is required for the 600 kilowatts is not available. And then you tend to find out that it's going to be a couple $1 million to pull the electricity to that area. So we're trying to avoid that with our infrastructure and with our NEVI funds. We want them to go as far as possible. So we're working one-on-one with the electric providers to not only locate the best spots per traffic moving, but also the best spots of where the electricity is available.
Okay. There's a lot of questions for you, Candy, here in the Q&A.
That's okay.
Another one from Robert Youngberg asking if there are any requirements for basic facilities at charging stations in the program you're talking about, bathrooms, water, shade, benches, etc.
So the NEVI fund has, it's laid out some requirements. Of course, you have to have ADA. We as a state know that it's very important that we need to have shade for the majority of the state. And if you don't need shade, you definitely need something over your head to keep the snow off you, right? So both sides of the state are dealing with weather-related items. The infrastructure that we have installed in our state so far using Volkswagen funds, we have had canopies over them. So I believe that that will continue to be important for anything that we're putting in. As far as the bathrooms or facilities, that is a #1 priority to me. As a woman and often driving throughout the state by myself, to have an electric vehicle and just stop somewhere to charge where there's no facilities, I would not feel safe. So that it's definitely a priority, and we are looking for those locations to best suit the funds that we're using to put in charging stations. It is definitely an important factor for us.
All right. Will, a question for you. What kind of feedback are you getting from local governments on your EV funding finder tool? And do you have any anecdotes about how local governments have used that tool so far?
Yeah, I know it's been really helpful so far. I think, like I mentioned earlier, it's like optional to indicate if you want us to stay in contact with you. 400 people have already, stepped in to want that. So I'm assuming over 400 have already tried to use the tool, and have heard good things about, the usability and how helpful it is to identify new opportunities. I don't have any specific anecdotes, but I do know, I think folks are finding it quite useful, and I'm glad that all of our hard work's paying off and connecting folks with the right opportunities.
Follow up on that, like if a local government contacted you and like needed some help navigating a specific one of those funding opportunities, what kind of resources do you offer at Electrification Coalition, or what kind of resources would you recommend at another location that those local governments pursue?
Yeah, we have a federal funding team here that helps kind of navigate the process and helps people identify what funds make sense. And, we're really familiar with the Joint Offices resources. We have a whole bunch of other resources that we can help connect folks with. There's also, the Achieve toolkit we work on with a number of other organizations that can also help with like policy and program ideas. So happy to connect folks with, all the right people here at the EC that can help with those programs.
Excellent. Another one from the Q&A for you, Candy. What does the process look like currently for contractors or developers to participate in the portfolio you talked about?
So our first year, we are working with the utilities directly because they currently have infrastructure placed where we need it. We had used Volkswagen funds to put the infrastructure in place that met the requirements of the 50 miles and the kilowatts needed at that time. However, the new standards, the kilowatts needs to be upgraded. So we have reached out to the utilities and partnered with them to update the current infrastructure. It will be in year 2 when we start looking at the US highways that we'll be working with other businesses and figuring out our way of how we're going to contract with them to qualify for the NEVI funds.
So a separate part of that question, the attendee is asking what a good starting point might be for a business that was interested in helping with the work. Should they reach out to Nevada DOT or a specific utility, or do you have any advice there?
I would definitely reach out to us and let us know that you're available so we can put you on the stakeholder list. So once we start those outreach programs for individual areas, you'll be aware of the meetings and be able to find out what we're trying to achieve and see if we can come up with a plan together.
Okay. And that email address that's listed here on the screen would be the best way.
Yep.
All right. One more. Is the state looking for the developer to provide turnkey solutions to include land acquisition, engineering, construction, commissioning, and operations and maintenance?
Yes, we are. Yes, we are. All of the states I have worked in many groups since the NEVI plan has been introduced, and we've gotten the rule process back, and all of the states are looking for the same thing. At this point, it doesn't seem like the states want to own the infrastructure. It's something that we are not aware of how it works. We don't necessarily have qualified electricians to be working on the infrastructure itself. So our goal is to hire people who this is their expertise, and that will get the best service and the best uptime for the infrastructure that we're putting in our state.
Excellent. This question looks like I think any of us could have an opinion on, but there's a local government. This one's actually not in Colorado, but it's asking. Our town is not currently designated as an alt fuel corridor, and therefore is ineligible for a lot of the NEVI funding. What are some ideas for either, like, I guess, how we could add our state highway to become an alt fuel corridor, or what are other funding options that might be available to do EV projects in our area? Candy, do you want to start there, and then
Sure. Definitely look at the discretionary funds. Those funds are available. At this time, the state of Nevada, we are not going to be adding any more alternative fuel corridors because we have our main corridors designated. At the time, the FHWA would only allow us the interstates or the US highways. So if your city is falling on a state road, that's most likely why it's not on that corridor. I also would advise that you join our stakeholder group, because once we build out the designated alternative fuel corridors, we will be able to take any funds left over and put them towards those state routes. There are state routes that we are looking at because we know that they are extremely busy and in those rural areas. But we cannot designate money until the alternative fuel corridors are built out.
Will, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I'll just add, a lot of the IRA incentives do have, just as 40 requirements as part of the Biden administration's goals. And so that does include, low income and rural communities and making sure that the infrastructure is built out in those areas too, pointing to also, the 30C tax credit I mentioned. That's a great place to start for getting some incentive dollars together for building out infrastructure in some of these areas.
Well, and I also wanted to add, Will, that your EV funding finder would be a great place for them to start as well.
Definitely. Yeah, that's I mean, like I've said before, a great tool. And it really is as easy as like plugging in your own EV. You just, say who you are and what you want to do, and the options pop up. So thanks for the plug.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would just add that it's only the NEVI program that has the alternative fuel corridor restriction attached to it, and all of the other sources of money that we talked about generically are usable in different locations that aren't alternative fuel corridors. So I think looking at we'll share around the slides in this presentation. There's a bunch of different pots of money that local governments could use to do EV projects outside of alternative fuel corridors if the local government decided it was a priority. And if you need help, I'm happy to talk with you, and I think Will is as well. Will, another question for you. So I guess in your experience working with local governments on EV projects, what are some of the most common obstacles that come up, and how do you handle them? And then I guess a follow-up to that, can you tell us a little bit about the work you've been doing in Nevada with Clark County?
Absolutely, yeah. I think when you're working with local governments, the stuff we've seen as the biggest obstacles is there are so many stakeholders you have to get together and on the same page, and it's just important to communicate very early in the process with everybody and do it often moving forward. Really think that helps smooth out a lot of the bumps in doing these projects. Working with the Clark County, the Electrification Coalition also has another tool called the Dashboard for Rapid Vehicle Electrification or DRIVE tool. And it is a fleet analysis tool that allows fleets, public or private, to enter their vehicle identification numbers for their fleet vehicles and see, which of those vehicles are very easily able to be replaced by an electric vehicle similar to the one that they're driving around that's internal combustion engine. So we see it as an alternative to doing costly and time-consuming telematics surveys of their fleets, and really helping them to identify what are the low-hanging fruits of where we can get started with electrification now. And so we've had Clark County do a drive analysis, and we've done that dozens of times across the United States, and always see that there are often a lot, but at least some vehicles that can be replaced today. And the way the tool works is you can work with the different levers and see if there are no incentives available, or is it still viable, and so you can kind of customize it to be conservative or aggressive based on what you're expecting incentive wise or otherwise to get funds for these vehicles.
That sounds like an interesting project. Candy, you mentioned that the state isn't planning to directly apply for the NEVI discretionary grant program that just launched.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit more about what you are planning to do to support MPOs or local governments, or the tribal governments that might be preparing applications for that?
Sure. We have in-house people that are grant writers, so that's always helpful for those of you that have not written a grant or might need somebody to walk you through the process, or might need some help with wording. We're more than happy to help you with that, or at least send you to somebody that can help you achieve the best application possible. We also are willing to write letters of support, which when you turn in grants, the more support you have, the better your application will look. To even just walk through the process of how to deal with the local utility and talk to them and find out what the costs are and what you're looking at, so that when you're turning in the grant, you're actually turning in real dollars needed. There's a lot of opportunity for us to help you, or at least give you guidance on where you can find help. Whether I send you to Travis or I send you to the FHWA, we will definitely find help. We want as much money as possible to come to our state. So it's important for us, for the MPOs and the cities, to be applying and getting their needs met and helping them achieve the goals that they have.
Excellent. I just have one, I think one last question for you, Candy, and then we'll wrap it up. Do you have any advice for members of the audience here about how they might be able to help assist Nevada in building out a well-connected charging network?
Raise your voice. Let us know where you think that charging stations are needed. We're using the data that we have, and we feel that the data is very good, but we are not on these roads as much as you are where you live. So it's really, really important for you to use your voice, and feel free to let us know things that you think are important, so that we can, take everybody's knowledge and build the best infrastructure and the best north to south and east to west routes that we can make.
Excellent. I think that's all the time we have for today. If you have any follow-up questions or would like to talk to us about specific projects, our contact info is here on the webinar screen. We recorded this and we'll be circulating the recording via email. So feel free to share it with anyone who couldn't make it today. And I'd like to thank Candy and Nevada DOT for participating in this. I really appreciate the time and the expertise and all the great work you're doing. And then also Will, thank you, and thank the Electrification Coalition for sharing all of your work with the audience today. And also thanks to everyone who tuned in for this presentation. I hope you found it informative, and I look forward to working with you all more in the future.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Travis, and thanks, Sweet, for pulling together.
Yeah,
All right, take care.
thanks.